Hey guys, Foxdrop here with a video on 5 junglers that are making a comeback now in League of Legends. Today we'll be taking a look at 5 junglers who have been falling off the map pretty much all season, but who are coming back up now and are actually pretty bloody strong. I'm going to try and stay away from the really obvious examples here, things like Shyvana or Cho'Gath, stuff that's really meta, despite the fact that both these champions were pretty unpopular until maybe 2 patches ago. I feel like you guys already know about them, they're old news, so today we'll be focusing on things that are a little bit more obscure. I'll also give you some advice on how to play these champions, because I'd recommend picking all of these up for solo queue. Not only are they pretty strong right now, but they're also very unpopular, so your chances of getting them, not having them taken away, not having them banned, are pretty bloody high. So without any further ado, let's get cracking with numero uno, Shyvana. Shyvana most recently received a buff this last patch, patch 7.14, and to be honest, it's actually a fairly significant buff. Shyvana is one of these champions who in my opinion is always pretty solid for solo queue. The reason for that is because she's really strong in the 1v1s, in the skirmishes, and she plays like the objective game really well. If you're playing someone in solo queue who bullies the enemy jungler really hard and is also really efficient at farming, then that's the kind of playstyle that can really punish junglers who aren't on their toes. It's also something that's downright dirty to play against and really hard to play against from the jungler's perspective. It often requires coordination and help from your teammates to stop a Shyvana from destroying you. And of course, as we all know, you're about as likely to see teamwork in solo queue as you are fire not feeding. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, maybe I'm being a bit harsh there. Teamwork in solo queue is actually not that rare, but you get my drift. If you do want to play Shyvana though, I highly recommend that you do put a focus on that bully playstyle. Make sure you're invading the enemy jungle pretty much whenever you can. Stick wards in the enemy jungle so you always know where the enemy jungler is. If you're going through the lane phase and the enemy jungler is doing more stuff than you are and is stronger than you are, you're doing something wrong. Shyvana is also one of these champions who has an incredible amount of damage without having to build too much of it. So outside of your Blood Razor, you really don't need to build that much damage, which means you can be really bloody tanky. And being tanky is great because it means that you can be a huge body in team fights. It means that it's really hard for you to muck up because it's not so punishing. All in all, your brain has to be switched on to make the aggressive plays on Shyvana, but outside of that, she's pretty simple to play. Speaking of champions that are pretty simple to play, the second one we'll be talking about today, Dr. Mundo. If you're anything like me, you're extremely surprised to hear that Dr. Mundo is coming back into the meta. I guess when you really think about it, the fact that all these tank items being buffed as hard as they have, maybe not that surprising to see Mundo coming through again, but generally speaking, Mundo as a top laner has been a thing, and even then, not for a while. But as a jungler, that's really old school. But yeah, essentially because this new tank meta that's coming through because of the buffs to Cinderhulk and all these other tank items like Thormail and Knight's Vow, it puts Mundo in a pretty good spot. On top of that, the meta and the matchups really favor Mundo in the jungle right now. Mundo's biggest problem, specifically as a jungler, is his early game and those early game matchups. Mundo can fall pretty low on health when clearing the jungle, so if you're up against someone who's really strong in the early game, someone who has a lot of pressure in the early game, you can really struggle. So with early game bully champions not being as popular and with tanks being more popular, it suits Mundo quite nicely. Mundo's also very good against tanks too, not just because he doesn't get punished by them, but because with his Q, his infected cleaver, the percentage health damage on that destroys tanks. The cool thing about Mundo as well is you don't really need any specific playstyle. You can kind of just play how you want to, whether you just want to be farming a lot more, you can do that, he's pretty fast at clearing. If you want to be ganking a lot and making enemy players cry, then he's pretty good at doing that as well. But ultimately there's no real pressure for you to do anything because you're just a massive body at the end of the day and you're pretty strong throughout the game. The third up and coming jungler here is Fiddlesticks. Again, similar to Dr. Mundo, he has some pretty favorable matchups in the jungle right now compared to before. But honestly, outside of that, nothing too drastic has really changed with Fiddle. He's always been a pretty good solo queue jungler. The reason why he's so good in solo queue specifically compared to competitive is because he plays off of a lack of vision to make his stuff work. In order to get the magic of Fiddlesticks rolling, you need to be able to ult out of Fog of War. And if you're against smart opponents, they'll know that that's what Fiddlesticks wants to do, and so they'll ward their flanks. But in solo queue, oftentimes people don't have that optimal vision coverage, and as such, you can get some really spicy ultimates out and destroy team fights by yourself. There's also the added benefit that Fiddlesticks is actually a pretty serviceable, like, supporty champion. So even if you do fall behind, there's a lot of utility in your kit that will still make you useful. Fiddlesticks is not only good coming out of Fog of War to start plays, but he's also good at countering plays as well. He's a really good like anti-engage champion, because if the enemy team goes in and dedicates to a play, Fiddlesticks then pops his ultimate and turns it back around, and that is absolutely deadly. There's a reason why Fiddlesticks' win rate spikes up the later the game goes on, because it's all about getting good ultimates off in those team fights, and if you're good enough on him to do that, it's pretty bloody powerful. My advice for playing Fiddle would just be to do what you gotta do to get level 6. Don't try and do too much before that point, and once you hit level 6, whenever your ultimate is off cooldown, try and blow it on someone. But when your ultimate's on cooldown, you really do just want to chill out. You're pretty reliant on that, as Fiddlesticks is a very much a make or break thing for him. Don't forget, he's also extremely good at cheesing objectives as well, things like Dragon and Rift Herald. Because of his drain, he can tank them endlessly. And also, I mentioned just how good Fiddlesticks is at coming out of Fog of War. Make sure you get an early sweeper, oracles, and always have a control ward on you as well to deny that vision. Wouldn't recommend going so far as to getting a Duskblade for the vision denial though. Although having said that, Duskblade is just absolutely busted right now, so you never know, it probably would work. Before we move on to the last 2 champions for this video, guys, I just want to thank you for watching the video. I hope you're enjoying it. If you are, you can leave a cheeky thumbs up, and if you like it so much you want to see more of me, you can hit the subscribe button as well. But moving on rapidly to numero quattro, as they say, in absolutely no languages in the world. It is the most okay champion on this list, and in the whole bloody game, actually. Ramus. You guys may be seeing a little bit more of this spiky armadillo in your ranked games. He's not too forgotten, but as it stands, he was never really considered a premier pick in solo queue. But there's always someone who could do what Ramus does, but just a little bit better. If you wanted early game pressure, early game ganking, you'd go Elise. If you wanted that tanky geezer who was good at picking on that one target, you'd go for Warwick. If you wanted tanky person with engage, you go for someone like Zac. But thanks to new tank itemization, Ramus is actually really bloody strong right now. There are 3 specific items that make Ramus just absolutely bonkers, and they all synergize so well with him. Firstly is the obvious one, Cinderhulk. It's pretty good for like any tank obviously in the game, but when you consider the fact that his ultimate is essentially just like a really strong Cinderhulk, it kind of meshes well with that. On top of that as well, you have Thormail, very obvious choice for Ramus. Most people would actually rush that second item even before Thormail was reworked into what it is now, which is a lot stronger than it was before. And then lastly, you have Righteous Glory, which combined with his Powerball leads for some really bonkers engages. Righteous Glory has always been able to do that, of course, but now the stats are a lot better. They favor Ramus a lot more. It kicks him into the next gear. When it comes to learning how to play Ramus, it's actually pretty simple. One of the biggest misconceptions about him is that you have to gank really, really hard in the early game. Ramus's win rate actually gets higher and higher the later the game goes on. He's not even that much of an early game champion. Having said that, your early game ganks certainly are nothing to sniff at, especially if you're playing versus someone who doesn't have a gap closer. If you can just pick on that lane, it's really hard for them to get away from you. But honestly, you can kind of just chill out if you want to as well. I would say put more focus on ganking than farming. And then in those team fights later on, just run into the enemy team, soak up as much damage as you can, taunt the enemy carries, and you've done your job. The last champion I want to mention for this list, guys, Maokai. For some reason, Maokai is not picked that much, despite the fact that we've been seeing a decent amount of him, honestly, even in the competitive scene. You'd think if something's picked in competitive, it'd start being played in solo queue, but statistically speaking, he's actually really unpopular still. Maokai completes the trio of Shyvana and Zac, who after their recent rework, have become really solid junglers. Again, he's benefited a lot from the tank itemization. Cinderhulk and Righteous Glory specifically are really, really good on him. Maokai and Ramus actually have some pretty similar playstyles, so if you enjoy one of them, you'll probably enjoy the other one as well. I would say that Maokai leans much more to like the CC style of things, the more supporty style of things, and I would also say that he's much more of a ganker in the lane phase. But again, you kind of just like chill out, get tanky, sit on the enemy carries, and you're sorted. There's actually something really cool you can do with Maokai as well if you play flex queue or you play with your mates or something. Not that any of us have friends, but we'll just pretend for a moment. You can stick a sapling in the bush of the bot side buff, have your bot laners take that buff down to like 20 health or so, and then run it into your sapling. Then you just get that buff for free. You get level 2 really early, and then you get an extremely fast level 3, and you can go and gank and catch the enemy by surprise. We saw this happen actually in the EU LCS once. I'm not sure whether or not you can pull it off in solo queue, but with friends, I think it could happen. Anyway, that's all I want to say for this video, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheeky thumbs up if you did, and like I said, you can subscribe to me if you want to see more of my League of Legends video. Don't forget to chuck me a follow over on Twitter at FoxdropLol and catch me streaming twitch.tv/Foxdrop. All those links will be down below in the description. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a great day, and I will see you in my next